Zeno's Paradox, a paradox created by language, not by reality. Zeno's paradox is usually treated as a problem about motion. Achilles cannot overtake the tortoise, because before he reaches the tortoise, he must first reach the point where the tortoise was. By then, the tortoise has moved a little farther. Achilles must then reach that next point, but by then the tortoise has moved again. This process repeats indefinitely. Therefore, according to the structure of the argument, Achilles seems unable to overtake the tortoise. At first glance, the paradox appears to reveal something strange about reality. Motion seems obvious. Bodies move, people walk, arrows fly, runners overtake slower runners, and yet when motion is broken into infinitely many segments, it appears to become impossible. How can something so ordinary become logically impossible the moment we describe it? The usual answer is mathematical. Infinite series can converge. A distance can be divided into infinitely many smaller parts, and yet the total sum can remain finite. Achilles can cross half the distance, then half of the remaining distance, then half again, and the infinite sequence still adds up to a finite distance. This answer is correct within mathematics. It resolves the formal structure of the paradox, but perhaps it does not go deep enough. The deeper issue is not motion itself. The deeper issue is the relation between reality and the language we use to model reality. Zeno's paradox does not arise because reality is contradictory. It arises because human cognition represents continuous reality through discrete conceptual units, and then manipulates those units as if the map were identical to the territory. Zeno is not truly describing reality. He is operating on a linguistic and conceptual model of reality. He takes words such as Achilles, tortoise, distance, point, before, after, and movement, and then separates the described process into infinitely many conceptual stages. The paradox does not appear in the running itself. It appears in the act of describing running through a system of divided signs. In other words, the paradox is not hidden inside the world. It is produced inside the model. Reality moves continuously. Language does not. Language must cut reality into pieces before it can speak about it. It says, here is Achilles, there is the tortoise, this is the distance between them. This is one point, that is another point. This moment comes before that moment. But these divisions are not necessarily natural boundaries in reality itself. They are cognitive and linguistic cuts. They allow the mind to handle a world that would otherwise be too fluid, too continuous, too dense to process. Without these cuts, there is no clear object. Without objects, there is no counting. Without counting, there is no measurement. Without measurement, there is no prediction. In this sense, language is not a transparent mirror of reality. Language is a compression system. Reality is continuous, but language compresses it into units. This compression is necessary. A human being can the entire flow of reality at once. We must reduce it. We must divide it. We must name parts of it. We must say this and that, before and after, object and space, motion and distance. These are not merely words. They are tools for survival and cognition. But every compression produces distortion. A map is useful because it leaves things out. A map that contained the full territory would no longer be a map. It would become another territory. In the same way, language is useful because it reduces reality. It makes reality thinkable by making it smaller, cleaner, more discrete than it actually is. Zeno's paradox appears when this compression system is pushed beyond its proper range. When we divide the path of Achilles into infinitely many linguistic or mathematical segments, we are not literally dividing reality itself. We are dividing the representation. We are cutting the map again and again, and then becoming surprised when the cuts generate a problem. But the runner does not encounter an infinite list of conceptual checkpoints. Achilles does not stop at each abstract division and ask permission from logic to continue. The motion occurs as a continuous event. The paradox is created when the model is mistaken for the movement. This is why Zeno's paradox can be seen as a seam line between map and territory. Most of the time, our language works well enough. We say the runner crosses the field, and no one is confused. The linguistic model fits the practical event, but when we take the words too literally and begin dividing the description infinitely, the seam becomes visible. The map starts to show its artificial joints. The paradox does not expose the impossibility of motion. It exposes the limitation of a representational system. It shows what happens when language designed to compress reality is treated as if it were reality itself. This is not a simple error. It is a productive error. In fact, it is one of the deepest features of human thought. The mind must hallucinate structure in order to think at all. This hallucination should not be understood as mere falsehood. It is not the hallucination of a sick mind. It is a controlled hallucination, a necessary fiction, a cognitive operation that allows the world to become intelligible. We invent boundaries, objects, units, numbers, and sequences. Then we use them to reason, build, measure, calculate, and predict. The separation of continuous reality into discrete units is not a bug. It is the condition for mathematics. Without discretization, there is no counting. Without counting, there is no number. Without number, there is no measurement. Without measurement, there is no science in the form we know it. The mind must first break the world into units before it can build systems of knowledge about the world. So, the problem is not that language distorts reality. It must distort reality. The problem begins when we forget that the distortion is there. Zeno's paradox is powerful because it reveals the hidden cost of cognition. We gain thought by losing continuity. We gain clarity by imposing boundaries. We gain mathematics by transforming flow into structure. But when we manipulate the structure without remembering the flow, paradox appears. This is why Zeno's paradox is not just an ancient puzzle. It is a warning about every system of abstraction. Whenever we build a model, we compress the world. Whenever we compress the world, we create artificial divisions. Whenever we manipulate those divisions as if they were reality itself, we risk producing paradoxes that do not belong to the world, but to the model. This happens far beyond Zeno. In metaphysics, we ask whether the self is one thing or many things, forgetting that self is already a linguistic compression of memory, body, continuity, social identity, and inner experience. In ethics, we ask whether an action is simply right or wrong, forgetting that right and wrong often depend on a frame of value, consequence, intention, law, culture, and power. In science, we classify phenomena into categories, then later discover that the categories were tools rather than natural joints of the world. In politics, we name groups, identities, ideologies, and nations, then act as if the names were solid objects rather than historical compressions of unstable human realities. In psychology, we name emotions such as anger, grief, trauma, love, anxiety, and desire, then forget that the lived experience is often more fluid than the label. The same mechanism repeats. The map becomes too convincing. The model becomes too clean. The word becomes mistaken for the thing. Zeno's paradox is simply one of the most elegant early examples of this structure. Achilles runs, the tortoise moves, the distance changes. In reality, there is no crisis. The crisis begins when the event is translated into a sequence of conceptual divisions and then treated as if the divisions govern the event itself. The paradox is not in the legs of Achilles, it is in the grammar of the description. This does not mean Zeno was foolish, quite the opposite. Zeno's genius lies in showing that ordinary concepts become unstable when they are pushed to their limits. He reveals that the language of motion contains assumptions we usually do not notice. We think we understand movement because we can use the word. But when the word is unpacked, divided, and formalized, hidden tensions emerge. Zeno did not fail to understand reality. He succeeded in exposing the fragility of our descriptions. This is why the paradox remains philosophically important even after mathematics resolves its technical form. Calculus can show how an infinite series converges. But the philosophical lesson is broader. Human beings do not access reality directly as pure flow. We access it through forms, signs, measurements, distinctions, and conceptual cuts. These cuts are useful, they are unavoidable, but they are not innocent. Every question we ask already chooses a frame. Every concept we use already imposes a structure. Every model we build already decides what counts as relevant, what counts as an object, what counts as movement, what counts as evidence, what counts as a problem. Zeno's paradox begins when the frame becomes visible. It is the moment when language, after helping us think, turns around and traps us inside the conditions of its own construction. The solution, then, is not to abandon language. That is impossible. We cannot think without some form of symbolic compression. The solution is to remember the difference between reality and the tools we use to model reality. A map is not useless because it is not the territory. It is useful precisely because it is not the territory. But the map becomes dangerous when we forget what kind of simplification it is. The same is true of language. Language is not reality. Language is a compression of reality. It allows us to move through the world conceptually, but it also creates the possibility of mistaking conceptual movement for real movement. Zeno's paradox shows what happens when we divide the compression rather than the world, then mistake the resulting difficulty for a property of the world. Achilles does not fail to overtake the tortoise. Our description fails to remain stable when it is stretched beyond its natural scale. The paradox is not a discovery about the impossibility of motion. It is evidence of the limit of language when language is detached from the reality it was meant to model. All similar paradoxes share the same origin. They arise when thought operates purely on the map and forgets the territory. They arise when abstraction becomes autonomous. They arise when the mind continues cutting, naming, dividing, and formalizing, but forgets that the original world was never made of those cuts. Zeno's paradox is therefore not merely about Achilles with the tortoise or motion. It is about the human condition of thinking. To think is to compress. To compress is to distort. To distort is to gain power at a cost. And paradox appears at the point where the cost of the compression becomes visible. Zeno did not show that motion is impossible. He showed that language, when mistaken for reality, can make even the most obvious movement look impossible.